forest department with the hope that we will use AI to solve a use case through an open innovation challenge called startups from around the country to solve this problem.
Can AI catch PUSHPA?
I'm sure. Those that are looking at the usage of robotics, AI-powered robotics, in order to clean up the lakes.
It's a fantastic example of computer vision put to practice.
Yeah. Right. Then again, in the context of reproductive health, mental illness, a lot of different startups that are working in that space because
sometime back, I was working with a concept of mental health, and they were primarily in suicide prevention. Hello friends, welcome to databicep. I was in Hyderabad to meet two leaders from the world of artificial intelligence. Praveen, who heads NASSCOM AI Charter for Telangana, and Arijit, a senior technology leader and an early stage investor. My main focus was to understand what are the different use cases startups and enterprises are trying to solve using artificial intelligence. So if you're here till the end, I hope you will also learn a thing or two. So I, Mawsam, welcome you to databicep in its series in Talk with Leaders. You primarily work with a lot of startups, right? And when we were discussing, you said a lot of the startups are from social sectors, right? So how is AI actually impacting life?
So clearly there are startups that are operating in this sector. They are not as known as they should be, mainly because they are down in the trenches and they're doing really solid work, and they don't have time to market themselves. It's as simple as that. Now, there's a startup that I work with, which is in the context of wound assessments, and they have a hardware device that basically does what you just talked about, of a smartwatch. But then this is in the context of a wound, using imaging techniques, looking at the kind of flow underneath the wound, and then based on that, it sort of triages certain amount of information and says, this is the nature of wound, the kind of bacteria that's present in that wound, because ultimately you want to promote healing of that wound in a rapid manner. This is important because as a nation, we are, high on diabetes, and diabetic ulcers or these wounds take a long time to heal and repair. Could also be in the context of post-operative recovery, where these wounds or the stitches are getting healed, or these cuts are getting healed. And it's important to understand if any infections have come. Now, they are operating from that point of view where they are looking at, assessing these wounds in a manner that otherwise, if a nurse were to be looking at the same wound, making those assessments, she can take or he can take maybe around, let's say, 2 to 3 minutes, or 4 minutes. This can do, or maybe even longer in some of the cases where the training is not adequate. But this can do it in like 30 seconds or maybe a minute under. And that is huge value because, again, we talked of the efficiency in the ecosystem, healthcare ecosystem, and these kind of tools help a lot of these things. Then there are startups that are on the side of environment. Those that are looking at the usage of robotics, AI-powered robotics, in order to clean up the lakes. In fact, there's a lake very close by to this location where we are at, wherein the startup from Odisha that we are supporting has been given that mandate to clean up that lake using their AI-powered robotic device. Same concept can again be extended to even aquaculture, wherein these tools are very much helpful because farmers otherwise will spend a lot of manual effort, whereas these tools can really simplify these things. You talked about cases like autism, I think, in the past when we were chatting. There's another startup that's NCR based, and it was their own personal story where their child was seen to be somebody who's on the spectrum, and they said, okay, let's do something about it. They had a few doctors on board. Now they said, can we sort of look at the questionnaire that is typically administered in order to assess this and automate this as a first level intervention, and they rolled it out as a sort of a B2C application, and parents or caregivers, without having the need to go to a doctor, can use that with a fair degree of confidence to at least do the preliminary screening. So that is something that got a lot of attention.
If you're doing something interesting in the world of technology especially in artificial intelligence, and have a fantastic story to share with the entire world, please reach out to me. I have all the time and patience to hear you out and help you to spread the news to the world.
Then again, in the context of reproductive health, mental illness, a lot of different startups that are working in that space because it is a taboo for a lot of women to talk about certain topics and certain issues. And in the comfort of their own home, they're able to interact with technology that is asking them some questions, and then in that process, be able to even potentially do a first level counseling of sorts, which is much needed because the kind of challenges women go through is tremendous, and they need somebody who's a safe companion of sorts, and oftentimes they don't find that. And also in cases, we are fortunate to be in a urban setting where there is access to resources and help. But imagine the kind of challenges that women face in a rural setting, and in many cases they are not even allowed to go outside the house beyond a certain point in time, or maybe it's a ration. So we are talking about scenarios like that where tools like these or technology like this can add a whole lot of value. I mean, I can keep talking about this, but these are definitely some of the stories that come to the top of my mind.
No, I think the last thing that you mentioned, right? I mean, the curious thing that's striking me there is it's almost like there's a case that people might trust an anonymous algorithm more than even probably somebody in the family.
True.
Yeah. So there could be some
And
possibility of that as
they're
well.
actually you hit the chord right. Sometime back, I was working with a concept of mental health, and they were primarily in suicide prevention. And what they said that a lot of time, if a person is suicidal, they never call to their close one, but
Right.
maybe in the middle of night at 3 a.m. in the morning, they like to open up in front of someone who doesn't know them. Right, because the issues are very, very, very sensitive. People
Yeah.
generally don't talk about that. There are a lot of social taboos around that. So
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Possibly, yeah, it could be a big thing.
And I just wanted to add to the example that Praveen was taking, the first one that Praveen was talking about, right? The assessment of the situation of a wound. Yeah.
Mhm.
And while the timing is only one part of it, that 30 seconds versus I think 4 minutes, 5 minutes is what you said, right? The timing is only one part of it. But imagine, imagine that you're saving a visit to a doctor. You're
Mhm.
saving that time that you're waiting in queue to
Mhm.
actually get seen. The risk of infection, especially if it's a larger wound or something like
Okay.
that sort, the risk of infection that you might have in transit from a sanitized home environment to a hospital, there's a risk of infection also. So there are a lot of those situations that also that are latent, that we may not always be putting a specific value to when we are figuring that out.
No, just sorry. So on the same topic, right? So if you look at again a rural setting, now if an ASHA worker is empowered to use this device on a wound that is closer, or at least the transit issue is
Right.
slightly reduced. It's just from the home to the primary healthcare center.
Mhm.
An ASHA worker is empowered to use this device and make those assessments, and then only the ones that require more intensive scrutiny can then be pushed to
Right.
a larger facility, and which is more equipped to achieve this.
Right.
And that is even more powerful, right?
Yeah.
So not every visit need to go to a bigger
Exactly.
facility, and
Yeah.
the issues of infection during transit are completely avoidable.
And that
Sorry, I didn't
opens
mean-
up a lot of efficiencies right? That opens up a lot of free time for the doctors or bigger centers.
And better health outcomes.
Okay. Oh, that-
But see, this kind of thing that works both ways. Yeah?
Uh-huh.
So I think the example that you're taking of the wound assessment is a fantastic example of computer vision put to practice,
Yeah.
right? So I know of another example which was leprosy detection, where there was a computer vision logic which is being used, and there's a lot of imagery.
Thank you. Can bring it. Thank you. Yeah, so you're talking about leprosy, right?
Yeah, so I was talking about this, app that was developed for detection of leprosy. Yeah, and in the Indian market, in India, obviously, that's one of the things that gets detected very late because of lack of health facilities. A lot of times people, just ignore a patch that they might have had on the skin for a while because it doesn't interfere with your day-to-day life that much, right? So it goes undetected for quite some time. So the idea was that you take a picture of it. There's an AI algorithm that essentially is trained on a lot of pictures from leprosy patients across India, and it gives you it gives you a recommendation on whether you should immediately go see a doctor, etc. Right? Basically, the assessing the chance that it might be a leprosy case. So the whole app gets developed. Everybody is very excited about the technology and everything. The whole app gets developed. Later on, we figure out that major challenges, because in the rural settings, people will not have very high resolution cameras that are essentially going to give them a high degree of confidence on the result in the first place. So what you were saying about the ASHA worker, right? It's much easier to equip an ASHA worker with a high resolution camera that will give you much better results than banking on every individual to click their picture and send, right? So there is a potential intervention there in terms of how you implement. Right? So
how do you do that? Like, you cannot give everyone a very high resolution camera.
You don't have to. That's where the ASHA worker comes in, right? Because they're sort of, it's the network of these kinds of people. Even ITC had started a program long time back called this eChopar.
Right? eChopar. But that was mostly for the
that's not got anything to do with
right?
AI. Correct. But that's not got anything to do with AI. But the idea was that you have a network of one person who's relatively highly trained compared to the rest of the network.
Okay.
Or in this case, has a better device than the others.
So distribution channels is essentially what we're talking about.
So a channel, right? So people don't have those high resolution cameras. And B there's a very simple test to actually check for leprosy. You know what it is?
What is that?
It's called a pinprick test. So basically, if it's a leprosy patch, you won't have it won't be sensitive. So you just have to prick a pin. If you don't get a sensation, there's a much higher chance that it is a case of leprosy. If you have a patch, you just prick with a pin. That's it. You don't need.
That means sometimes you don't need AI everywhere. Sometimes low tech is also good, right?
Yeah.
Or no tech.
Or no tech is also good.
Yeah, because it serves a purpose. It doesn't give you anything more. So I think and that's where, when it comes to that balance of going back to the question of like, is it a hype or not? So when it comes back to that balance, that whether you have a solid watertight business case that you're going to support is of utmost importance, and how you have actually assessed that business case is essentially going to make the difference of whether at the end of the day you're going to use it or not. That so long as you're focused on that, there's a much higher you'll have a much higher probability that you're not going to get caught in a hype if it gets very overheated. And
which is exactly the thing about product market fit, right? So as long as you're developing a solution which solves a problem, I think that is the core, and you stay true to the need as against the hype.
Okay. And that reminds me, like if it is for LinkedIn, I think yesterday you put a post that you were talking with various I think wildlife people about that, what they can use technology to improve. I don't know much about it, but what was that, right?
So about a year and a half before, early or late 2021, there were a lot of conversations that we were having with the Telangana Forest Department, with the hope that we will use AI to solve a use case. Again, it was a very hype-led approach. Having seen and read a lot of different articles that AI can really contribute to the wildlife or the wildlife conservation efforts, and we approached it that way. And then we were questioned by the officials if any of us had actually visited a forest, and we were stumped by that. And then they said you should, and then we didn't blink an eye, and we said we will. And then we visited a forest in the northern part of Telangana, which is in a region called Jannaram. It's a Kaval Tiger Reserve. It's about 4.5, 5 hours from here.
Yeah, I know
Suppose
General,
after Nizamabad, not a lot of people know.
I know General, yeah.
I'm glad to hear somebody say that because they haven't done as
And there's
as
a
much
tiger reserve as well. I think you have to go up, and there is a dam as well, right?
There is a dam.
Uh-huh.
There's a dam over there as well. So we were there, and in our head we were thinking about these kind of use cases we're going to solve. And then when we went there and the rubber hit the road, as they say, we had no use case. And then we said, okay, we were there for a couple of days, and we spent time with the forest divisional officer, and he walked us through what's over there. And what we found was there were camera traps, and then we said, okay, let's take a look at what's inside that. And the density of camera traps was sufficient enough in terms of the coverage. And they said, let's take a look at the data as to what's really there as a part of these camera traps. And then, so there are images nicely archived with lat longs. And then suddenly we thought, okay, we can, and we asked, how are they reviewing this? And they said they do it manually. A forest official, maybe a lower official, lower ranked official, is going through every image one after the other.
Right.
It's a huge cognitive overload for an individual to be doing this. And just sample this, right? So for a 2-month period in that forest reserve, about 30 to 40,000 images get generated. So an individual has to go through this. Now, add a layer of complication to this. These are movement-based camera traps. As in, this movement triggers a camera to take a picture. Leaves are moving, pictures are getting taken. So 95% of those images have nothing, no object of interest, either people or animals. Now, imagine a person going through these images, looking at leaves plainly, and he's just scrolling. Maybe there's an animal and there's a human being, and he's just scrolling.
Eye fatigue, right?
Eye fatigue, cognitive fatigue, all of that happens. So we said, can we automate that? Because now we can suddenly do spatiotemporal analysis. All of this is retrospective, no doubt. So we did that exercise. We said, okay, let's do an open innovation challenge, call startups from around the country to solve this problem. And we said, okay, can we empower them with maybe some funding so that they can execute a pilot project? Because that has to be the big draw. So we partnered with the industry committed and we gave 20 lakh rupees for a potential startup that can solve this problem. And we said, okay, we put this out in the open, 60 startups applied. We whittled it down to about 15 startups or 12 startups based on their approach note as to how they intend to solve this problem. And to those, we gave them that sample data set. And we said, okay, can you build a POC? And this proof of concept was evaluated by experts in the forest department, in the industry, academia. Then we had about 3 startups that were picked for a final round. 1 startup was selected, a Pune-based startup, and they went on to execute. And this whole process was about 3 to 4 months for us to identify a suitable startup. Then came the pilot project implementation. So that was 20 lakh rupees. About 4.5, 5 months, this project was implemented. So much so that there's a lot of value that came, because about 5-6 million images were processed as a part of this pilot project. Now, forest officials were able to get abundance estimates of 20 different kinds of species. Something which they intuitively knew, but then, in a spatio-temporal setting, now they know which species are where. Incidentally, in this forest reserve, as per the recent census,
and they're habited areas, right?
The areas where they constantly habit, there's a pattern of certain species roaming around in certain parts of the forest reserve. Incidentally, when this data was captured and the data was analyzed, there were no tigers in that forest reserve. Now, this is northern part of Telangana, remember, and then this is sort of very close and attached to the Tadoba forest sanctuary. So the tigers tend to move from this region to the other, and there is a constant movement that is often there. But for the fact that there is a highway separating the 2 forest reserves, and tigers have to undergo a whole lot of stress when they have to move from one to the other.
Right. Is it there's a physical separation?
There is a physical separation. There's a train line. There is a national highway, and hence there are not a lot of tigers that freely move between the 2. But during the time that this happened, then there were no tigers. Now, when tiger we consider as the top of the food chain, the apex predator, right? Then, if in the absence of an apex predator, other predators start to come up, and then the whole food chain dynamics change. And then you start to look at the carnivore-herbivore interactions, and the abundance of these start to increase and decrease. And it's important for a forest official to understand that.
Yeah.
Now, if this AI solution wasn't there, none of this understanding could have been possible.
Yeah.
This is just augmenting their own intuitive understanding as to what's happening around them. So that was what we achieved. And then the state government said, okay, this is great. I mean, we have a real understanding of what AI can possibly contribute. And the idea is now to get into real-time monitoring of the wildlife and install multiple cameras. Imagine whatever the kind of CCTV coverage in the city we have is really high. And somebody was saying that this is probably number 2 or number 3 in the world, perhaps. Maybe Delhi is also there somewhere. But imagine the same setting in the context of a forest. Forest, there are various issues. There is issue of illegal movements, poaching of animals, timber or any kind of wood
Any forest
that can
resources,
be.
I think, yeah.
All of that is valuable for poachers, and this is something which forest officials will need to have constant monitoring. You can't process data in the past and then go there and nobody's there.
Sure.
So you need something real time.
Can AI catch Pushpa?
I'm sure. Because so one of the things AI can certainly do is, forest officials can say these are the named officials.
Okay.
Take their photographs, right? And then vehicles that are authorized to go inside the forest. And any vehicle or any individual that is not in that white list is considered a pushpa.
Okay.
Right? And it's certainly possible, very much doable. And that is the whole idea of this exercise, to be able to implement something real time in nature. So the idea was to bring together a very diverse group of individuals. The roundtable that you talked about that I hosted a couple of days ago was to bring industry, especially experts in technology, AI, in networking and communications, because we're talking of a forest setting which doesn't have power, doesn't have cellular connectivity. Now, in the absence of these two, how is that we're going to achieve what we're trying to achieve?
Correct.
So we need people from different facets of the society that can contribute to this use case. So we also had people from academia, especially on the responsible AI standpoint. How are we, especially where there are indigenous communities in the buffer zones, and they are there because they have been perennially there. It's not that they are encroaching on that space. Now, they will get captured in the photographs. Do we have consent? We have to think about those angles as well.
Right.
Then we talk of wildlife organizations, think tanks who've been operating in this space. And the idea is to have a meaningful discussion and dialogue in order to be able to essentially be able to roll out a project of that. So that's really what happened in that.
That's great. That's great. And I see now the kitchen started. Possibly they'll provide some food to us right now. If you find these informations useful, then please comment that below. And please let me know what more you want to listen to. Next week, we will come back with more of such discussions on what are the skills that you need to flourish in the brave new world of artificial intelligence. Signing off for today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching Data Bicep. Please like, share, subscribe to get weekly feeds.